So welcome to Creative York. I'm Mindy Christian. I'm the executive director here. And this is Matt Kale. He is our board chair. And I would just want to introduce him and have him say a few words before we get started with everyone else. Matt?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. For me, this is exciting. I mean, we're in a building, in a space, standing around art. And it's been a very long time since we've done that. So I think it's amazing, and I'm so happy to see everybody that showed up tonight. And it's a great show. I hope you're enjoying the show. And thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it.
And on that note, the show that you guys have been viewing, as most of you know, is Hope and Healing, a journey into the light. And we not only, a little bit different way that the gallery committee put this together, is we not only had a submission process for artists to submit work, based on Amanda Gorman's poem, Up the Hill We Climb, but we also had community members do artwork based on Hope and Healing. So as you're looking around the artwork, you can notice artist pieces intertwined with our community members' pieces. So we had 7 organizations or schools participate in this exhibit. We had Logos Academy, York Academy, Crispus Attucks Youth Build Charter School, York Catholic High School, CASA, William Penn Senior High School, and York County Food Bank. And I just want to thank all the artists and everyone in the community who did participate in this exhibit, and I want to give you a round of applause. So, thank you so much. If you are an artist who has artwork in the exhibit, could you please raise your hand so we know who's all in the exhibit? Awesome. Thank you so much. And I also want to point out, not only do we have the exhibit here in person for people to view, we also have it online as well. We have an online platform that we use now to upload all of our gallery exhibits. So if you have any relatives or anyone that you know that might not be local, you can share a link with them to see the exhibit online as well. On the online exhibit, each artist statement is there with their piece, as well as the community pieces. And then here in the gallery, I have the statements that each community member had written down of what Hope and Healing means to them, but also the artists have statements in a binder here as well that you can see. So, and on that note, I'd like to kick it off and introduce to you Joy Agummadu. And she is a student from York Academy, and she's going to kick off our exhibit by reading Amanda Gorman's poem, Up the Hill We Climb. Thank you, Joy.
The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet, the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine. But that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. So we lift our gazes, not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew. That even as we hurt, we hoped. That even as we tired, we tried. That we'll forever be tied together, victorious. Not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade. The hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, that would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can periodically be delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption we feared in its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how can we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know that our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the golden hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When the day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it.
Joy, thank you again. That was amazing. Thank you. Awesome. So next, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Carla Christopher. She is our 4th Poet Laureate here in York. She was also our first African American Poet Laureate here as well. She's a diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer, and she is now an ordained Lutheran pastor. So it's my pleasure to introduce Carla Christopher, who's also a dear friend of Creative York's. Help me welcome Carla to
and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the roaring sea. I want to start today by telling you a few stories. Because isn't that what graces this wall? Not facts, which have less than a 10% chance of changing the heart of a human, but true tales of suffering, of experience, of pain, of joy, of resilience and celebration that is in itself an act of resistance, saying I cannot be repressed, suppressed, kept down, or not let experience the joy that is inherent in the divinity of my creation. Your smile is your activism. So embrace it, my dear friends, and know that each and every story on this wall is part of the process of the hope that is intrinsic to creation. When we continue, when we tell our story that someone else might not feel alone, we are continuing to extend our hand, are we not? And in community, we can bear just about anything. So part of my way of exploring this incredible exhibit was that I took it upon myself to learn more about the history. What are the stories that continued to nurture my people and my community on the way to what is here? How did this miracle of beauty even become possible? And in that journey, I stumbled upon a house. Now, this is a mystery, so please pay attention. We'll see who gets it first. But here in Philadelphia is connected by lots of wandering roads with beautiful old homes, and one of them is a home that belonged to a woman named Miss Jeanette. Now, the Women's Auxiliary, for those who don't know, that is the fancy women's organization about town. The Women's Auxiliary chose blue paper for the walls with salmon-colored birds and green marble for the mantel. They bought the house because it was the only one that survived the Battle of Germantown. They used it for teas and for sewing lessons. Years later, the paper buckles and peels, and plain folks' mantels and whitewashed brick still underneath. Worn stairs from the kitchen up into a second attic had no reason to be there. A dry well dug out with a broken shackle Nobody made this far north, mixed in with wire nails and crock shards. Tales of a casket maker came by Miss Jeanette's house more than the 2 times she had children die. Casket maker left late at night, wheels digging deep into marsh mud, too heavy for empty boxes, hole drilled in each side, letting air in, no body need. Now, Miss Jeanette drank tea, sweet with maple and beet sugar, spindle of flaxseed yarn found in an old trunk, but she surely sold neat stitches. All right, who got it first? I will give you a hint, my friends. Maple and beet sugar and flaxseed yarn were products that could be made without using the products of slave labor. So finding those as sweeteners or as home products meant that you were likely to be in the house of an abolitionist. So now why might a casket maker come by late at night and leave with a box that was particularly heavy and air holes in the side? What you get?
To transport slaves?
Yes, yes. It turns out that even in the late 1800s, there were amazing people in the country that were doing things like making the choice to purchase ethically made goods, that were also finding small, simple, creative ways to speak up and to push back against injustice. And those same people, yes, were finding creative ways to help save the lives of those that were in danger. But I love this story because there is just as much beauty in her choice of using beet sugar instead of the cane sugar grown by slaves as there is in the number of people that she probably smuggled through her home outside Philadelphia. Every one of us has the ability to be part of the story of liberation. I'll share another story with you. After Uncle Buck died in 1954, I went back down to South Carolina. It took me damn near 3 days to find that old house from my kids' summers. A tree had fallen right into the bedroom ceiling. And nature was taking back what Uncle Buck had beat back for 109 years. Truck he kept at the end of the bed, it'd been eat at by the rain, and the animals out in the woods like a runway that old trunk, it was still there. It was locked, rusted, busted. The lock fell off, one swift kick. But under a quilt, made up of lost stories, rust-covered shackles, wrapped in scrap rags. That accent Uncle Buck never lost, I found its birthing home. It wasn't Mister's house that Uncle Buck came up from all them years ago. This is the origin story of the largest collection of slave shackles and memorabilia outside of the Smithsonian. That large collection, which travels the country in the back of a rusty pickup truck, doing pop-up educational events for children, churches, and community centers, is owned by an individual who found the first set of slave shackles in his great uncle's trunk after his death. It's a story of how one person who had no involvement in the journey towards liberation found a personal connection. All those years when he thought his Uncle Buck was talking about coming up from Mister's house, his old boss, it turned out in his southern drawl, he was coming up from Massa's house. And Uncle Buck was an escaped slave, which was why he hid and lived in a cabin in the middle of nowhere all his days. and he was unable to release those shackles, but he had such shame about having been born in slavery that he never told his family. But his family still found a way to honor his spirit by using Uncle Bup's story 3 generations later to educate others in a way that is accessible, relevant, and real. You do not have to be a Smithsonian, my friends. You can be in a 2-room gallery in a 5.3 square mile city, and you can change the world through education and the uplifting of stories of resilience. I'll share one more story. How many of you have ever been to a place called Harper's Ferry? Oh, I love a well-traveled crowd. Yes, people. Yes. Harper's Ferry is the site of a fabulous uprising. Maybe not everybody would agree that it was a fabulous uprising, but I find it quite spunky. But John Brown led an uprising and an armory raid to help free black slaves. And it's one of the few stories in history that we have that it was not just the affected people. This was not just a slave uprising. This was allies who recognized that it's not just enough to say, well, I'm a fan of black and brown people. I'm a fan of other marginalized groups. Being an ally means showing up. And it doesn't matter if it's your choices in purchasing, your choices in if you're offering transportation. There's a million things that you could be doing. Volunteering at a local food bank, right? Advocacy for voting rights. But if you're not showing up in some tangible way, you do not get to claim that you are an ally. You're simply not as active a part of the current harm. Hard truth moment. All right, back on track. And so John Brown and this team of interracial, it was free black people, it was enslaved black people, and it was white folks who managed to find a way to work together. And though it was not successful, it lit such a spark of hope that a waterfall of other acts of resistance began and came from it. And those acts of resistance inspired apathetic Northern abolitionists or abolitionists in the North who just didn't know what was going on. It raised the level of awareness to the point that the end of slavery came about a great deal faster and had a great many more people who were involved, because awareness raising works. Telling the stories, sharing the stories, uplifting the stories, click, share, repost, it makes a difference. And so the beauty of Harper's Ferry is that it's where a revolution was sparked and where hope was present even when it wasn't successful. And that's something I think we need to carry in our hearts, is it not? Because I don't know about you, I've had my moments of being discouraged, frustrated, overwhelmed, frightened, helpless. But there's only one being that knows how this is going to work out, and it ain't me. So I keep going, because there is a spirit of hope inside me that springs eternal. And I hope that in you a similar flame is kindled when you see the artwork that raises awareness on these walls. There is a place in Harper's Ferry where you can stand on a rocky outcropping and you can see the rivers of the North and the South flow together into one. Hope lies in the jewel green of the Shenandoah River, color of bright jade carried up from the south, where even the river begins below. Hope lives in the white-capped blue-gray of the Potomac, teasing rock and root, changing mountain and moving even stone. Hope is at the base of a hill in Harper's Ferry, where two rivers meet, become one, carry home the sand and the silt of two different lands, of 100 different languages. I want to leave you with a final thought, because one of the temptations of doing work that centers around the oppression of people of African descent is to fall into the trap of believing that this is an oppression grounded only in history, that this is part of our past. Well, one, African immigrants are still coming to this land and facing a whole new wave of oppression and prejudice, sometimes even from Black Americans, I'm ashamed to say. We still have LGBTQ individuals and people of color being pitted against each other, competing for a fraction of resources, as if there is not enough in this country to end poverty by the donation of one owner of a mega corporation. I said it. There is such an investment in our country being divided because scared people buy things. Scared people hoard things. Scared people turn against their neighbor and, desperate for news or information, listen to almost anything they're told without taking the time to reason through that news. So, not just resting as a revolution, do I invite you to, but rejecting fear, choosing peace, confidence, choosing faith and trust, also opens up your mind and heart to making beautiful changes and seeing that there is more truth even than the truth of slavery, which informs a great many of our laws. Don't get me wrong. But my final story, as I was driving with a group of woke folks, right? We were touring sites linked with slavery, and we were learning about how awful it was hundreds of years ago. You know, the living history museums where you can still walk into the slave cabin and see how they lived. You can walk into the churches and you can see where they had a separate balcony for Black people who somehow still managed to hear the voice of God in the words of their slave owners' churches. Tell me the Holy Spirit can't work miracles. And that spirit, capital S, across religious divides, my friends. My God's too big to be put in a box. I don't know about yours. But as we're driving on our lovely bus, you know, feeling very, very, very good about ourselves, we're driving past a section, and I said, oh, wow, that's a really, really realistic depiction of a slave plantation. Wow. Rectangle building, faded white, no porches or gardens, as if nobody comes to stay long. Haze of pressed dirt yard and a light wind dulling the colors of coarse weave fabric, blue pants, child size red dress, brown shirt drying on a fence of wire and raw wood, stacked pallet beds and a faded black and white photograph or two through the window, an outhouse away from the trees, heavy with fruit and fields ready for bare-handed picking. El Maestro sings a faster song, taps his foot to pick up the pace of the pickers. Dios escucha un canto espiritual, en cual lugar hacia el cielo. This is not an old fight, my friends. It is one that continues and that requires our awareness and our activism and our presence to raise that awareness and to recognize that oppression is an equal opportunity oppressor. So if we divide ourselves, we are giving it the upper hand. Where is the hope? The hope is in this room united together. So many countries, so many races, so many genders, so many ages, so many abilities. All the wisdom that is needed to change York and to show a model that the world can adapt is present in this space. So I am grateful to you for being on this journey. And I invite you to continue with encouragement and with joy, because that is truly in itself a revolution. Thank you, friends.
Carla, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone coming out tonight to experience this exhibit as a community. If you have any questions, please let us know. But before we let you kind of mill around, I want to introduce our new Director of Education, Ivy Rogers. Come on up, Ivy, so everybody can meet you officially.
Hi everybody. Sorry, that's very hard to follow up. That was amazing, Carla.
I know.
I'm very much like emotional right now.
Yeah.
But I just want to say thank you everybody for coming out tonight. It's really, honestly, very inspiring to see everybody here. Like Mindy and I have been here when it's completely empty for months now, and it's very exciting for people to gather together to share, experiences and stories, and really, unite, our community again. Post-pandemic, we're kind of coming out of that, and everybody has been so isolated. So I'm very excited to announce a lot of upcoming classes, workshops, and community interaction, collaborative experiences. So I'm very excited, so please stay tuned on our website, and we also have some information here at the desk for some upcoming classes and camps. And if anyone's interested in volunteering, feel free to reach out to me, and if anyone has any other questions after this, feel free to find me in the gallery. But thank you all for coming out tonight.